Hey everybody, welcome to Goshen Prepping. I've been asked numerous times to take a look at Senate Bill 3589. I've been watching it, and it's something we need to talk about. And it is very important because it's going to affect every one of us. So U.S. Congress Senate Bill 3589, introduced by two Democrats, and they are Senator Markey and Senator Butler. Simply put, to amend Title 18 on the U.S. Code, they're going to prohibit unauthorized private military activity and for other purposes. And Title 18 is simply just a criminal code. And it's cited as, simply put, Preventing Private Paramilitary Activity of 2024. And after going through defining some terms, here's what it comes down to. Ready? Unauthorized private paramilitary activity includes, it is unlawful to knowingly, in any circumstance described, etc., to, look at this, publicly patrol, drill, or engage in techniques capable of causing bodily injury or death. And this alone should make it so this bill does not pass. And of course, I hope it doesn't, because look, martial arts. I'm a martial arts instructor. I teach all kinds of people, kids, adults, and it is always 100% emphasized in my school that it's about self-defense. But we do this. I mean, if you look at this bill, to engage in techniques of causing bodily injury or death. And although there are some techniques that we do that could lead to death, bodily injury, that is like almost anything in martial arts. Of course, there's bodily injury. So anyway, if this bill goes through, goodbye any ways of trying to protect yourself. Interfere, interrupt, or attempt to interfere with a government operation or a government proceeding. And in a lot of ways, this is already there, by the way. This is already in place, but I'm going to show you what they mean by this. For example, go to an FBI agent trying to apprehend a suspect and try to interfere with that. See what happens. That's not the part they're talking about. They're talking about specifically here a government proceeding. In other words, any government's trying to push in a specific act or law or legislation or an executive order. If you interfere with that, now you're going to be held liable under this criminal code. Interfere with or intimidate another person, that is the person's exercise of any right under the Constitution of the United States. Let's talk about that one for a second. There's all kinds of rights we have under the Constitution and the amendments, and the government's trying to interfere with us all the time. So what are they talking about here? Oh, they're talking about what they perceive as far as the Constitution goes. We see this all in the news now, not getting into all the different things that's happening in our community, happening to our kids, etc. The government wants to push what they want to push. And if you interfere with that, well, you know what? Now you're in trouble. You cannot assume the function of law enforcement, a peace officer, public official, whether or not acting under color of law. Therefore, you cannot assert authority or purport to assert authority over another person without the consent of that person. And locally, we have these laws in the books anyway. So what's going on? If we already have these laws in the books, why do we need to even do this? Again, go ahead and, I say this facetiously, don't do this. In fact, all this, by the way, I'm not a lawyer. You need to have a lawyer to look at this stuff if this comes into law. But you know what? I would like to see somebody, facetiously, I'll say this again, to put on a police uniform, put a little light on their car, pull someone over when they're not a police officer. You're going to get arrested. It's already a law. Oh, they want this to be a federal law, because when we look at federal laws, they don't want anybody under the federal authority to basically push this kind of stuff through. But look at this last point. Or simply to train to engage in the activities 1 through 4. So again, let's go ahead and look at number 1. You can't even train somebody to drill or engage in somebody causing bodily injury or death. So even though in martial arts, I may be trained to do some different techniques with my students, I tell the students, you know what, this should only be self-defense, but you know what, under part 5, it says I can't even train somebody with this. We also see circumstances, we'll only talk about this for a minute, travel across a state line or national border, use channels, facilities, or instrumentalities of interstate or foreign commerce. But look at this one, involves a firearm, explosive, or incendiary device, or dangerous weapon that has traveled interstate or foreign commerce. Involves the use of ammunition or a large capacity ammunition feeding device that's traveled in interstate. Are they really getting at that if you own a firearm that you can't take that across state lines? Is that what this is saying now? Or if you have what they deem to be a high capacity magazine, you can't take that across state lines too? Is that where they're getting at? Is that what they're trying to push? Because it doesn't say specifically what they're looking at here. And that's actually where the problem comes in, because when it's ambiguous like this, then the law enforcement people, aka federal agents, can use their discretion in how they view this and then sort it out in court later. I could see a lot of control just from this part alone. And there are exceptions. Exceptions include the U.S. National Guard, Navy militia, or regularly organized state militia, or any unorganized or reserve militia or called by the state. For example, if you are like one of those Civil War reenacting people who like to do that kind of thing, that's an exception to this. And guess what? You can be part of a parade from a bona fide veterans organization. or students in an educational institution authorized by the federal government or a state to teach military science, or members of an organization that's authorized by federal or state law to provide paramilitary law enforcement, etc. Okay, so long story short, this is what it's saying. Again, I'm not a lawyer, but the language on here is pretty clear. They want to make it, the federal government wants to make it so the federal government and, of course, state municipalities like sheriffs, etc., are the only ones who can do anything as far as like military operations, period. I'm going to say right away, this is very interesting because if you know anything about like Operation Enduring Freedom, there are countless paramilitary people who are trained in the military get out and then become civilian contractors because guess what? They don't have to abide by like the Geneva Convention anymore. It's really interesting how they skirted that, but still it's the same thing. The federal government authorizes those people to do it. In other words, the government says, the federal government, which was never founded this way, by the way, the states and the people had the power. The states came together to form a federal government so that way the states could work together easily. It was never supposed to be the federal government tells the states what to do. That's exactly what we're seeing here. They want to make it so the federal government has all authority, that they are the only ones that deem who can actually be paramilitary. But is that what the founding fathers said? Because when we see this beautiful thing called the Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And this is all, again, bound by the state, but nevertheless, when we look at a organized militia, and there's a lot of people who argue, what is that organized militia? Are we talking about military and stuff here? Or are we talking about like the militias like people talk about in our modern times? Because with this, the right of the people to keep and bear arms have what's called the individual right theory, which has been held up in the Supreme Court, saying that yes, you as an individual, you have a right to bear arms for protection. However, some scholars, like the prefatory language of a well-regulated militia, argue that the framers intended only to restrict Congress from legislating the state's right to self-defense. This is called the collective rights theory. Do you understand that? Because in this case, we're talking about, look, the states have power as elected by, the people. The people are the states. And the federal government was mostly just about commerce, maybe health, et cetera, trying to bring the states together so they are a united states. That's the purpose of the federal government. The federal government was never supposed to be putting down all these regulations to change the Constitution language. And that's exactly what's happening here. Because when we look at a well-organized militia in a state, the state allows the people to have a militia, but now this Senate bill is trying to make it so even those cases, any type of training at all, anything, so you and your buddy want to get together, if you're on a private property, that may be a different story, but you want to get together with a bunch of groups and talk about some different types of survivalist stuff, and it could easily be looked at as being 100% a federal offense. Militia and composition classes. The militia is simply just, in the United States, any able-bodied male 17 to 45 who has made a declaration of intention to become a citizen in the U.S. That's interesting now, considering all the stuff that's happening at the border. But it's broken down into two classes. The organized militia is like things like the National Guard, Navy militia, which you're familiar with, and an unorganized militia was anybody who's not in the National Guard or Navy militia. So when we go back to the Second Amendment, it doesn't say anything about organized or not. It says a well-regulated militia. Interesting. So this is kind of throwing a curveball in there. So what is this Senate bill going to push through? Is it going to make it that you can't do any training and everything outside? Can you not form a militia? Can you? Right now, it's very ambiguous, and they're not making it clear. But here's the thing. First off, this bill hasn't passed anything yet, and very well may get shot down at the first chance. And I hope so too, by the way, because even for simply things like trying to teach somebody to defend themselves can absolutely be outlawed. And that's why I think, because of the outlandish statements in this, personally, I don't think it's going to pass. But you never know. But it's something you need to be aware of, because as preppers, this goes right along with some of the things we do to practice and prepare and train. Those days may be coming to an end because of this bill.